If you're a professional brewer, you know how frustrating it can be when you go to place a yeast order and what you're looking for is out of stock. Well, Imperial Yeast is here to help by guaranteeing that commercial orders up to 20 liters of 10, yes, 10 of their most popular strains will ship free if they're not in stock when you place your order. Some of these strains include A38 Juice for those hazy IPAs, A07 Flagship, a classic in clean American styles, L13 Global, which is said to be one of the world's most popular lager strains, A44 Kviking for your warm fermented beers, and so many more. So in addition to pitching right with the highest quality yeast on the market, they're promising that yeast will be ready when you need it or shipping is on them. Whether you're a pro or a home brewer, if you haven't tried Imperial Yeast in your brewery, it's time to up your game. You can check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and place your commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. In the northwest of Belgium lies the enchanting West Flanders capital city of Bruges, sometimes referred to as the Venice of the North due to its canal system. In addition to swans, fries, and chocolate shops, there's an abundance of delicious beer that can be found in the pubs lining the quaint cobblestone streets, some of which were developed by monastic monks. You are listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this episode to discuss the Trappist ale known as Belgian Tripel is contributor Will Lovell.
So Belgian Trappist ales are like one of the main reasons I really got into homebrewing. Like I've been a big enthusiast of these styles of beers for a really long time. And Tripel is one of those that I just love. Me and my wife can sit down, pop open a 750 ml bottle of it and just share it together and just kind of like have a good time just having conversation around this style. So I really love it. I think it's a great style and I can't wait to talk about it.
So I actually know quite a few people who got into homebrewing specifically to brew the Belgian styles that they struggled to get here in the U.S. I'll admit, I've never personally had like a weird obsession with Belgian ale, but my initial inspiration to start brewing, I think people probably know this by now because I've told the story a million times, was that I was drinking Bud Light and I thought I might be able to save some money if I made it myself. But after digging into craft beer, I also tended to focus more on IPA and English ale, not so much Belgian. That being said, I've had many examples of delicious Belgian ale, including Tripel, both commercial and homebrewed. And as it's a style that I've developed quite the appreciation for. So I'm looking forward to chatting about this with you as well, Will, as well as going over your attempt to brew one using less than conventional methods. And just as a quick aside, if I sound a little weird today, it's because I feel like I may be coming down with a bit of a cold. So I do apologize for that. All right. If you like what we're up to and you want us to keep doing it, please consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy. By committing to a small monthly pledge over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Coming up in January of 2024 is the guy behind the best brewing magazine of all time, Brew Your Own, as well as Winemaker Magazine. Brad Ring. Anyone involved in brewing knows about Brew Your Own magazine, which is published by Bat and Kill Communications, a company Brad is the president of. In addition to their awesome publications, Brad hosts the annual Brew Your Own Boot Camp, which I had the pleasure of speaking at in 2019, and he also does other really cool events like the European Bicycle Beer Tours. To be a part of this session, you have to make your pledge of just $3 or more at patreon.com/Brewlosophy no later than Friday, January 26, 2024, as Brad's going to be taking questions that Saturday, the 27th. All past sessions are available on our private Patreon and Facebook pages, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever it is you listen to podcasts that allows you to leave those ratings and reviews, we would really appreciate that as well. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who in addition to having a remarkable YouTube channel chock full of great brewing related content, sell what we believe to be some of the best electric brewing systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you owe it to yourself to check out Clawhammer Supply. Whether you're after a 120 volt 5-gallon system or something bigger like their powerful 240 volt 10-gallon unit, Clawhammer has got you covered. Learn more about everything they have to offer over at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to check out their YouTube channel as well. So listener John Hughes shot us a pretty cool email based on our oft expressed love of a certain commercial pale lager. John said, I contacted Miller to encourage them to sponsor Brewlosophy. I've been influenced by you all to try Miller Lite, and I love the stuff. My choice of cheap beer beforehand was Coors, which I still enjoy, but I really like Miller Lite now. Molson Coors responded saying that it's actually up to local distributors for promotions and sponsors. Try contacting the local distributor for a sponsor. It's worth a try. What do you think there, Will? We've got people reaching out as our, being our voice when it comes to trying to find sponsorships, and they went to, one of the biggest sponsors we could possibly hope for, Miller Lite.
So first off, John Hughes, like 16 candles, John Hughes. But Miller Lite, if Miller Lite would sponsor us, even if it have to be regional, I don't know how that would work out with you being in California, me being in Texas. But I think it would be amazing to be sponsored by Miller Lite. I have to say, I think I've said this before, but lifetime, I've probably drank more Miller Lite, per gallon than probably anything else that I've drank, any single beer of. So bring it on. I would love to have a nice light lager that we could crush all week, as a sponsor of Brewlosophy. That'd be amazing.
Yeah. Look, it's not lost on me that despite our lack of overt intention, we are in a position of influence, which is why we do our best to speak as equivocally as possible. We're not spinning what are ultimately opinions as facts, or at least we try not to do that. However, as subjective as preference is, and we talk about that a lot, I honestly cannot understand how anyone could prefer another commercial light lager to Miller Lite. I get that some people just don't like light lager. That makes sense. But Miller Lite is just so good. Light malt flavor with just enough hops to make it taste like beer. It's crisp. It's refreshing. I obviously love the stuff. And you know what? I don't feel bad that we've influenced a few people out there to give it a shot as well. It's also hilarious to me that you reached out to Miller on our behalf, John. So some may think that I'm joking about wanting to bring them on as a sponsor, but honestly, I'm not. So if anybody at Miller is listening, or a local distributor, I have no moral qualms with the prospect of you coming on as a sponsor at all, though I definitely recognize that we're like the gum on the bottom of their shoe or small beans to them. So, if you're listening and you happen to work for Miller Coors and you want some sponsorship, hit me up. That'd be pretty sweet. Thanks again for the email, John. If you have show feedback, you could send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@thebrewlosophy show, where Martin is pumping out awesome brewing and beer related content. When we first got this ball rolling, I projected kind of jokingly that maybe we could hit 20,000 subscribers by our 1 year mark. Well, that's about 7 weeks from now, and we're currently only about 400 subscribers short of this goal. So if you wouldn't mind helping us out, that'd be kind of fun to have been right about something for once in a while. Go and subscribe to the Brewlosophy Show over at YouTube. We'd really appreciate it, and we're confident you're going to enjoy those videos just as much as you like this podcast. All right, when we return from this break, our focus will be on Belgian Tripel. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
I'm Mo Rocca, and I'm excited to announce Season 4 of my podcast, Mobituaries. I've got a whole new bunch of stories to share with you about the most fascinating people and things who are no longer with us. From famous figures who died on the very same day, to the things I wish would die, like buffets. All that and much more. Listen to Mobituaries with Mo Rocca wherever you get your podcasts.
It wasn't long after I started homebrewing that I had my first experience with a Belgian ale. I can't recall what the specific style was, but I do remember it being just amazingly characterful, blown away by the unique fermentation character in that beer, which we're all very familiar with at this point. Those people listening to this show, I imagine, are. Since then, I've brewed multiple batches of Belgian beers, including Tripel. It's probably one of my favorite of the Trappist style ales. But, you know, like most styles from this region, it has a pretty interesting history. I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, Will, Tripel is sort of kind of among the Trappist ales. It's kind of like the youngest one.
Yeah, it is kind of the new kid on the block. It's only really been around since the 1930s. And then I know, Westmalle got a hold of it, and they had some of their brewers there kind of like form it over the next 20, 30 years to kind of get it to the style that we have today. So it's kind of got a cool history. I guess it was first envisioned by a man named Hendrik Verlinden in 1930. And then he was at a brewery called, I'm going to butcher this name, but Drielinden Brewery. And when he first released the style, he called it Witkop Pater. And so he chose to market it as a Trappist beer, and that was before I think Trappist breweries had the whole shoe-in on the market for Trappist ale. And what's interesting is that until he died, they let his brewery keep the Trappist mark even after that came into being. So this guy apparently did enough to influence the style in Trappist monasteries that they kind of let him keep the Trappist moniker on his beer until he passed away, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I was reading about this Hendrik fella, and it's funny. He's a secular guy, but at the time, in the 1930s, based on what I could find online, his whole ploy was, well, these Trappist beers are popular, locally, so let me just call this a Trappist beer, and then the Trappist, or the monasteries picked up on this Tripel idea and started making it for themselves. In a way, kind of, effectively making it a Trappist ale. So why strip this secular dude who's not even a monk or whatever? He's not a member of this monastery. But he marketed it as such, and the monastery started brewing it. And today, now, almost 100 years later, 90 years later or so, we've got what we call Belgian Tripel. I think it's a funny story, and it also kind of just drives home the fact that this whole marketing thing, where there's a little bit of deception, has been around for a lot longer than just us.
Right, and the Trappist moniker there is basically for somewhat marketing, but somewhat like discerning, like breweries that actually still exist with monk oversight on abbey grounds, right?
Right.
So it is kind of its own marketing ploy in a way, because you're drawn to buy a Trappist ale from Chimay or Westmalle or wherever, instead of buying it from another brewery. But I think Westmalle kind of is who's known for this style a little bit more so than Hendrik is, and they've done a lot to craft it to get where it is today. And I, along with many others, probably consider their Tripel to be kind of the gold standard for triples. Like, there's some better, but it's a good mark to reach if you can be as good or maybe even better than Westmalle, because they do it really well.
Yeah, so of all the commercial triples that I've had, Westmalle probably edges out the others. Chimay is great, but the Westmalle triple to me is just kind of the gold standard. That being said, the best triple that I've had have been from homebrewers. There's a couple. I got a couple friends in town who really bit they visited Belgium and came back and were like, okay, our idea, our conception of what a lot of these Trappist ales are is a little bit different than what they actually taste like over there. And so my friend Sean in particular really started digging into this style and trying to brew them to match what he experienced over there. And the triple he made, I'm telling you, is out of this world. So, but yeah, Westmalle to me, phenomenal. Chimay's good. We'll talk a little bit more about some other commercial examples later. The BJCP, in terms of their overall impression, the way that they describe generally Belgian Tripel, is as a strong, pale, somewhat spicy Belgian ale with a pleasant rounded malt flavor, firm bitterness, and dry finish. Quite aromatic, with spicy, fruity, and light alcohol notes combining with the supportive, clean malt character to produce a surprisingly drinkable beverage considering the high alcohol content. That is like the perfect description of the triple that I've had that I've actually enjoyed.
Yeah, you want to be able, drinkable despite the high alcohol. Yeah, you're drinking a 7, 8, 9% beer, and the problem is you're going through them so quickly because it is pretty crushable for being 9%, and you will get in a lot of trouble really quick. Don't ask me how I know.
I may ask you how you know when we're done recording this. So let's go over some basic style description stuff. First, we'll start with appearance. The color should be deep yellow to pale amber. I like to describe, the color of a good triple as being almost golden, like a sunset. It's really pretty. Clarity, it should be good clarity and very effervescent. It's interesting to me that they include that in the appearance, and I think part of that is because you will typically see some bubbles coming up while it's in the glass. It's a very, very bubbly beer. And the foam should be long-lasting, creamy, rocky, with a white head, resulting in Belgian lace on the glass. Belgian lace, of course, just being the foam that has stuck around on the glass when you're done drinking it. In terms of the aroma, what do we expect from Belgian Tripel?
So, you really want a moderate to significant spiciness, peppery, sometimes clove. You want some kind of moderate fruity esters. Citrus is okay. Lemon, orange. Can also have ripe banana, although I don't necessarily enjoy ripe banana. So if those can stay out of mine, I'm happy with that. Low hops. This is actually a style where I think some go up pretty high on the IBU, like 30, 40 IBU, which is pretty high for this style. And so you can get that spicy floral, perfumey thing from the hops. Also, you're aging these for a while, so that doesn't always come through if it's like a year old and been sitting in your cellar or in my case, my pantry. And then light malt, you get kind of a slightly grainy sweet, slight honey impression, a little bit of a I know that's kind of the main description, but a little bit of a crackery note in there too is okay from all the Pilsner malt.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about the esters and phenols in this beer when we get to the fermentation section, because I feel like a lot of people modulate those characteristics with their fermentation temperature. To me, a good triple should have a balanced ester and phenol note, but if it has too much clove, I'm not usually a fan. To me, I want it to be this kind of gestalt, this balance. It's balanced. I know people hate that word. I don't hate it.
I like the peppery floral kind of thing that can go in there. That's more what I like to focus on, and less of the banana and clove. Yeah.
It's weird that banana and clove are the two that get associated with characterful yeast strains the most often. In that's what it seems. Those are like two of my least favorite. And there's other aspects of these Belgian style, or even like Bavarian style, Weissbier type of yeasts, that it can produce these other characteristics that I actually do enjoy more than clove and banana. Anyways, we'll move on from that. The flavor of a triple should follow the aroma. Low to moderate fruity esters, low to moderate spicy phenols, low to moderate hop flavors, and low alcohol flavor. There should be a moderate bitterness in the aftertaste or there can be, I should say, moderate bitterness in the aftertaste with substantial spicy, fruity yeast character. And this beer should not be perceptibly sweet. It shouldn't have like a overly caramel flavor. It really, in terms of the malt flavor, we're looking more for that toasty but light thing. It's a part of the reason that these are often supplemented with simple sugars, is to really drive that dryness and not create this kind of sweet mess. So in terms of the mouthfeel, we're looking for medium light to medium body, lighter than the gravity would suggest, which I think is a great thing for really big beers like this. You don't want it to be overpoweringly or heavy. Very high carbonation, smooth alcohol with no obvious warming. It can actually be quite deceptive, like you were saying earlier, Will, is that you're drinking these things going, man, I can't believe this is 9% ABV. And the beer should be light on the palate overall. It should drink almost like an American style lager in that refreshing way, except it's got almost double, the alcohol, if not more.
Yeah, probably more than double. And I think we set a really nice stage here, because like when I drink a Belgian triple, we have like a 750 ml bottle of Westmalle or triple Carmelite or whatever it is that you're drinking. You want it to pour in that glass. You want it to appear like that nice pale yellow. You want that big cap of foam that just stays on there and makes you have to have a conversation for a few minutes before you can take a sip. And then you go in there and that aroma, that floral, little spicy, little grainy sweetness, although I know sweet isn't really an aroma. And then by the time you go in there for a sip, it should be kind of similar to the aroma, but then you get that dry finish with that kind of bubbly, effervescent carbonation in there. And I think we've set a really nice stage for a lovely triple here.
Yeah, and a lot of people will doctor up their triples with some other stuff as well. I think that's interesting. We'll get to that in a bit. In terms of the vital stats that is provided at least by the BJCP, which again, let's keep in mind, this is an attempt to try to organize a style, to try to make it something that we can refer to. Obviously, it's perfectly fine if you make a triple and certain pieces of it fall outside of these stats, which isn't terribly uncommon these days, but this is a good baseline for us. So we're looking for an OG of 1075 to 1085. That's pretty high, if you ask me. With an FG of 1008 to 1014, resulting in an ABV range of 7.5 to 9.5%. Man, you like we were talking about, that's more than double, a Budweiser or a
Sounds
Miller.
like a good time to me, man. Sounds like a good time.
Hey, you don't have to drink. It's efficient, if you ask me. IBU should be 20 to 40, which again, question what that even means these days, I guess. But SRM, you're looking for fairly pale at 4.5 to 7 SRM.
Yeah, that's 100%. And if you look at these numbers, this is a really big beer. But again, it finishes dry. And good examples, like we said, you can't even really taste the booze. So even though it's got all these like kind of impressive specs, it's one of those things that you want to have one or two glasses of, and maybe you'll have one too many until you realize it's too late.
Then you're sleeping well that night. That's perfectly fine. No judgment here.
Yeah. So once we get into like general recipe considerations, the primary malt in this beer is going to be Pilsner malt. And so you don't have to get too clever. If you read Brew Like a Monk, the West Mall recipe in it is like 100% Pilsner malt, which is a good starting point. But, if you look at other recipes like Triple Carmelite's one that I really enjoy, and it's a really incredibly popular that a lot of people enjoy. And they have things like malted wheat, flaked oats. Some of them have flaked barley in those homebrew recipes trying to copy Triple Carmelite. So, while Pilsner malt 100% may be more traditional, as homebrewers have a few more levers to pull here with the malt to kind of get some things like using aromatic malt or malted wheat or some of those things, just to kind of pull a lever here or a lever there to get what you're going after.
Absolutely. In terms of adjuncts, obviously the most popular is going to be some sort of a pale sugar. I like how the BJCP lists pale sugar because in Belgium, we've got all of the candy syrups out there that are candy sugars, candy syrups that are varying in color. So if you're making a triple and you want to use something like you'd want to stick with something like a D10 candy syrup or something like that, or you could just use table sugar, or you could use dextrose. The idea for adding the sugar is to boost that strength without contributing pretty much anything else to the beer, just alcohol, fermentability, and subsequent dryness.
I think it's worth noting too that a lot of Belgian Pilsner malts like Dingmans are a little bit under modified, so you're using a lot of malt and it may not be finishing quite as dry as it would if you're using something that was a little more modified. And so this pale sugar really helps drive that FG down to where you want it, because it's just creating alcohol, it's just drying out the beer, so to speak, and really is a great way to kind of thin out the body a little bit after adding all this kind of under modified like Dingman's Pilsner malt.
Yeah, totally. And I love Dingman's Pilsner malt, by the way. It's amazing stuff. Another adjunct that some people use, and I mentioned this earlier, is I know some people who like to add coriander to their triple, or they'll add pink peppercorns or something like that, just to contribute another layer of spice. And when we say spice, we're not talking about jalapenos here. We're just talking about that kind of rounded spice character. Not anything in particular, but something, that spicy, peppery, to kind of go along with the clove stuff. Have you ever made a triple with coriander or anything like that in it, Will?
I'm not a fan of that. Personally, I feel like those are flavors you should be coaxing from your yeast choice and your fermentation temperature. And so, I'm not a big purist, stingy person on a lot of things, but and as you can see, I'm about to do a whole lot of unsanctimonious things here in a minute. But but I do feel like for most Belgians, whether it's Saison, triple, whatever, I feel like the yeast choice and how you treat that yeast is, I prefer to pull those levers versus adding something like coriander and some of those other things. Cause I don't know that those are, for one, I'm not sure coriander is what I really want to accentuate in this beer anyways.
Right.
It can be there, but it's not like what I want to be overpowering. And like some people put like orange peel in them as well. I'm not sure that's what I want either, but it's your beer, it's your experience, so whatever floats your boat, but I'm not usually a fan of those things.
Yeah, it's almost like people are pulling from the other popular Belgian style of wit beer, and kind of just, borrowing from that tradition with this very big Trappist ale. I believe it was Ray Found, ex, Brewlosophy contributor, who shared a recipe for his triple that he was very proud of. It was one of his favorites. I hope it's Ray, because otherwise I'm misspeaking here. But and he includes some spicing like that. And I'll tell you, whoever it was, they shared it with me, and it was way better than I expected it would be. But that said, I'm with you. I like the basic version. I like to get the yeast character and not have other stuff in the way personally. So the triple that I've made has never been doctored with adjuncts other than sugar, of course. So in terms of hops, you're looking for your basic continental hops. Noble hops work well. Sotz, Hallertauer, Spalt, Tettninger, stuff like that. You can use other clean, say Americanized versions of continental hops, stuff like that.
You see Styrian Goldings a lot too. Like if you look at a lot of Belgian recipes, Styrian Goldings for whatever reason, which is just basically, I guess a different part of the world's Fuggle. It's used in a lot of these as well, especially for bittering. So.
Yeah, what you don't want is something like Galaxy or Mosaic. I mean, you can make one, but in terms of a traditional version of this beer, that level of fruitiness, it'd probably go well with the hops. But that blend of high oil with high alpha could make it difficult to really make a traditional style or a version of this style. So just keep that in mind. In terms of yeast, obviously, you got to go with a characterful Belgian strain, something like the Westmalle strain, which would be Imperial Yeast B48 Triple Double or WLP 530 Abbey Ale, Y Yeast 3787 Belgian High Gravity, obviously, popular base strain there. You can also go with the Chimay strain, which would be Imperial Yeast B63 Monastic, WLP 500 Monastery Ale, or Y Yeast 1214 Belgian Ale. There are certainly others out there that you can use as well. The beauty of Belgian brewing, or the Belgian brewing tradition, is that we have access to quite a few yeasts that these different monasteries are using or have been using to make their beers. So you can experiment with all of those different ones. Do you have a favorite, Will, when you're making triple?
I do want to give. I think Rochefort has a triple now. They're another Trappist monastery down in the Ardennes forest, kind of more south. So give them a shout out. But for me, for my money, for almost all of my beers, Westmalle, the Imperial B48 Triple Double or WLP 530 Abbey, that's kind of my bang for the buck, what I'm going to, especially for this style, because I do think, again, Westmalle set us a pretty good standard here, and so I'm usually trying to at least hit that standard or go slightly above it, and so I feel like using their yeast gives me the best probability of doing that. I like Chimay's triple okay. There's something to it that I can't place my finger on how to describe it, but there's something to it that I don't prefer as much as I like in the Westmalle.
Yeah, I prefer Westmalle as well, but I love the Chimay triple too. I think they're both great. I've used both of those yeasts quite a few times, and I think they're phenomenal. So, try them both. That's the beauty of side-by-side brewing, by the way. It's kind of what got us kicked off as Brewlosophy and doing our experiments is we want to see what differences there are when you just adjust one variable. And one of those variables is yeast selection, particularly when it comes to styles like Belgian, where that yeast character really is kind of steals the show, right? So, in terms of the brewing process for making a triple, this is the Belgian brewing tradition, arguably slightly more convoluted than English brewing, arguably less convoluted than German lager brewing. There's really not much to it that's too different than what I think most homebrewers are probably used to. In terms of water chemistry, this is, from what I could find, and I've talked to friends of mine who have varying opinions on this, I think you could argue for more of a neutral to slightly higher chloride, water profile just to help emphasize the malt. Though, in my experience, I like a higher sulfate level because to me, it contributes to that crispness and that drinkability. If you put a ton of chloride in a very dry beer, it actually makes it taste, in my opinion, less dry. So I go for the higher sulfate. Do you have a preference this isn't something that's like, you think about the origins of IPA and Burton-on-Trent water and all of that. I couldn't find anything very specific about water chemistry when it comes to making a triple.
So this is complicated because what some people want to do is they want to look at the water profile around Antwerp. So if those of you that want to know Belgian geography, Westmalle is not too far from Antwerp, and they have really, really high water, hard water there. And if you read Brew Like a Monk, I think it's there where I read that they imply that Westmalle treats their water somehow, but they're not really open about how they do it. They don't really give you specifics. So they're probably using this hard water and either watering it down or they're filtering it or some form of treatment. And so, but we don't really know what they're doing. But for me, I would not copy Antwerp. It's really hard water. I don't recommend it. You might as well just brew with San Antonio or Austin water if you're going to do that, honestly, because it's pretty hard here too with the aquifer water. But I usually go for either balanced, or I tend to prefer the sulfate as well, just because you want to accentuate that drier finish, and I don't want to put too much chloride in there that might take away from that dry finish, that like crisp, like cleansing the mouth feeling after you're done taking a sip that makes you want to go in for another.
Exactly. That's my aim as well. So if you're asking for opinions, listeners, we both like a little bit higher sulfate, maybe like 100 to 50 type of deal. So like, point, I guess, what's up? 1 to 0.5. Yeah. So go for that ratio if that's what you like. If you like a more malty finish, maybe go for higher chloride. There's nothing in the traditional brewing sense though that says you have to do it one way or the other. In terms of a mash, traditionally, you're probably going to be like you mentioned earlier, Will, using somewhat less modified malts means that we're going to mash for a little bit longer, around 90 minutes. And you're going to mash pretty low, 148 to 152 Fahrenheit, or about 65 to 67 C, to encourage that beta amylase activity. You want this wort to be highly fermentable. So you want to create as many of those short chain sugars as possible to encourage the dryness, particularly given the high amount of malt that's being used to achieve that target OG. Same thing with the boil. This is Pilsner malt. Of course, Pilsner malt has DMS or SMM. So 90 minutes to boil minimum to make sure that you drive off all of that DMS precursor, as well as to isomerize the alpha acids in the hops. Of course, we do that with every beer that we make. And the main reason for that 90-minute boil is that you're using 100% Pilsner malt, which is a little bit of sugar added in there for fermentability.
Yeah, and I think also because it's such a high ABV beer, sometimes boiling longer helps condense those sugars down. So again, you're making like a more concentrated wort that you can get a little higher ABV out of. So that makes a lot of sense to do kind of a 90-minute boil from that perspective as well.
Yeah.
And so after this, you want to chill it. You want to go quick. You want to get that cold break. And then you want to, as always, like as little trub to the fermenter as humanly possible.
Too much trub is gonna create a hazy beer. No, we haven't been able to find that in any of our experimentation. But traditionally, you want to leave as much of that icky trub behind in the kettle, and so that you're racking as clear a wort as possible to your fermentation vessel. You're going to hit it with oxygen, especially given how high of an OG this is. Bigger beers require more oxygen so as not to overly stress out the yeast. And then of course you're going to pitch a very high pitch rate yeast count, slug of yeast into this beer and let it ferment anywhere from 65 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 19 to 25 C. A lot of people prefer going a bit warmer than you might typically go with an ale, upwards in, like I said, in that 72 to 75 degree Fahrenheit range, about 23-ish Celsius, because those warmer temperatures are said to encourage fruity ester production. This is something widely accepted by brewers, and that is key to this style. There are some people out there who are fully convinced that cooler temperatures encourage a more clove-like characteristic in the beer. The fermentation, cooler fermentation temperatures somehow, encourage yeast to produce more phenols. I don't know what the science is behind that, but I will say in my experience, that does seem to be fairly true, in my experience.
And I know a lot of people, including myself, like to start cool and then kind of ramp it up as fermentation goes along. And I think this is a good strategy for kind of hitting a lot of zones for like kind of balanced ester and phenols. But also, Triple Double is a messy play date, man. It will use a blow off tube, because if you start warm and stay warm, it is going to make a mess. Oh yeah. And don't be surprised if like you walk outside and your firm chamber is just blown up with krausen everywhere and you got this sticky, icky thing going all over, because that has happened to me more than one time. So yeah, definitely fermentation. I like to kind of ramp up as we go. Sometimes even during fermentation, that's when I like to add sugar, just so that you kind of build up a little bit of a lower gravity starter, and then you add your sugar and it's got some jet fuel to take off to the end. But again, I like to ramp, use a blow off tube. Again, this stuff is a messy play date.
Yeah, it ferments hard though, and that's part of the reason for the mess. When you're done fermenting this beer, you can cold crash it. I think that a lot of people do that as a matter of course, just to get as much of that trub out of the fermented beer as possible before racking it to the serving vessel or whatever that may be. Now, this beer should be clear. That's kind of an expected thing when it comes to triple. It can have a slight haze, but this is not a hazy IPA type of hazy beer. Now that that clarity can be achieved through fining. It can be achieved through mechanical filtration, some other chemical filtration form. It can be achieved through time. I don't know how long most people like to sit on their packaged triple before serving it. For me, 3 to 4 weeks has always been fine for me. And by that point, the beer is mostly clear. I have friends who have served me triple that's 6 months old, that's 8 months old. And those are always crystal clear and they taste great as well. I do think there's something that happens with time like that, even when you are being very careful about oxidation. There's just something that happens. Some people prefer it, some don't. And again, that's just something to experiment with and to determine for yourself.
I do tend to age mine for a little bit. Like, I usually don't serve them if they're younger than 3 months old. Like, I usually like that 3 to 6 month window, and then even out to a year is fine. But usually, we're going to talk about packaging in a second, but usually if I'm brewing one, I'm going to keg condition it, and then I'm going to let it sit in that keg conditioning for 3 to 6 months before I even put it in the kegerator.
Yeah, there's something about time that seems to sand off the edges of that alcohol strength. It really mellows out the boozy part of a big beer, and triple can benefit from that wildly. I also do think that warm storage, this is something I don't think we've tested yet, and we should, but that warm storage expedites that process, right? So we have this belief as brewers, this is kind of an aside, but that you got to keep beer cold if you want to keep it fresh. But there are certain styles, take Imperial Stout or Quad or Triple, that you kind of want that aged character in it. And so, like all things, you heat it up a little bit. That should happen a little bit faster. As long as you're minding your cold side oxygen exposure, that shouldn't be an issue. So now packaging. This is an important thing when it comes to highly carbonated Belgian ales like Triple. I hate bottle conditioning, but if ever there was a style, I guess you could argue Saison's one of them, but if ever there was a style that is just appropriate for bottle conditioning, Triple is one of them because of that high carbonation, because of the tradition behind it. Or keg conditioning. Now, when we say keg conditioning, we're talking about bottle conditioning the entire batch in a keg. If you've never done it, it's incredibly easy and it works really well. So you give it a shot. But that also allows you to more easily get that higher, volume of CO2 into the beer. In my opinion, it's a little bit easier to get that than forced carbonation, which can be a little bit tricky trying to predict that.
Right. And with forced carbonation, you have to look at your line balancing on your kegerator setup, and that can be a little tricky there. I have a separate, I'm using the little duotite regulators on each one of my lines, so I'm kind of controlling each line separately. And so it's kind of easier for me to kind of control how much CO2 is going into each one. But again, you have to make sure you have lines long enough that can hold, 3 volumes of CO2 is a lot. And I'm not sure my lines right now could actually do 3 volumes of CO2. So you're not going to have it quite as spritzy coming out of the keg. But keg conditioning, if you don't want to bottle, like bottling, pretty much most of these high ABV Trappist is a great idea because you're probably not going to want to have more than 1 or 2 of these in a night, and that keg is going to stick around for a really long time, unless you're me and my wife. But if you're anybody else, it's going to stick around for a long time. And so, bottle conditioning is a great idea. And again, you're aging these things for 3 to 6 months before you're cracking into them. So keg conditioning with sugar in there to naturally carbonate makes a lot of sense and saves you a lot of money on CO2.
Yeah, one thing I want to get out there, though, is if you are going to bottle condition these, make sure you find the thick Belgian bottles. There are bottles made specifically for higher volumes of CO2, like triples. Just trust me on this. I have heard so many horror stories. I don't bottle condition. I don't think I've ever bottle conditioned a triple. But I've heard horror stories from people who have tried in your regular, homebrew shop amber bottles. And it's trouble. Those things are nowhere near as strong, nowhere near as thick. So just invest in those Belgian bottles. You can reuse them over and over. So what are we looking for in a good example of this of a triple? We're looking for light malt and hops. A focus is squarely on the fermentation character, that fruity and spicy note, with minimal alcohol warmth despite its strength. It should be refreshing. It should be drinkable. We've already talked a lot about some of the most notable commercial examples: Westmalle, Chimay, St. Bernardus triples, pretty relatively easy to find over here in the States. La Trappe triple is delicious as well. Anything else you can think of in terms of commercial examples?
Triple Carmelite is really good. It's considered by a lot to be even better than Westmalle, depending on who you talk to. Again, taste is subjective. But that said, my favorite triple, which we have not brought up yet, part of it's associated with a memory, part of it is associated with a flavor. But my wife and I, when we lived overseas, I remember our first trip to Bruges, and we looked in I think it was Lonely Planet, and it said, you got to check out this pub called De Geer, and this is the only place in the world you can get De Geer Triple on tap. And so we're like, okay, cool. So we pulled the place on like Google Maps, and like I didn't have like a phone plan in Belgium, so I just kind of screenshotted where this thing was, and we walked around in circles for I don't know how long until we realized you need to go down this tiny little alley that was barely 2 people wide. And we walked past it probably 4 times on this quest. And then we walked down and we found the pub, and then it was pretty busy. So all of a sudden we're up on the second floor looking for a seat, and we're drinking with this random Belgian dude like all night, just hanging out with him, drinking De Geer, drinking Golden Draak, all sorts of really great Belgian beers. And so, you know, I personally think De Geer is a really good example of the style, probably my favorite. But some of that is because of the memories that I associate with it. And so there's just this romanticism with that, along with Bruges and the De Geer pub, that every time and I can find bottles of De Geer at my local Total Wine and local Specs. And so it's really nice to just kind of pop open a 750ml bottle with the wife and just reminisce of old times.
I need to go make some memories like that. I've got a similar thing when it comes to Guinness nowadays. After my trip my wife and I went to Dublin. I actually went out to speak at a homebrewing conference out there, and then we did a trip around, and everywhere you go, I mean, obviously Guinness is everywhere. And so I have that same, now when I drink it, it just takes me back to Ireland, which is great. So this is one of those styles, though, triple, that I've had a decent amount of experience with. In fact, I've tried all of the commercial examples listed by the BJCP, as well as a bunch of homebrewed versions. I've made a handful of batches of triple myself. Every time, though, I've relied largely on more of a traditional approach, or a standard approach, I should say. Will, you were curious to see how one would turn out when cutting a bunch of corners in the brewing process. Those results when we're back from this break. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Chilling wort can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Xchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brulosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Xchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Xchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to Xchillerator.com today.
So, you've got an idea for a business, the store of your dreams. There's just one thing to figure out: everything. That's why Shopify's all-in-one commerce platform makes it easy to sell online, in person, and everywhere else. Sell on social media, source products with an app to get that first sale feeling. It's the only solution that gives you everything you need to sell everywhere you want. So when you're ready to bring your idea to life, power it up with Shopify.
Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/listen.
As someone who had the opportunity to spend a good amount of time living in Europe, your experience with Belgian beers is arguably more unique than mine, Will, which the story you told before our break emphasizes. But we both have experience brewing these styles, and to me, there's really nothing too convoluted about the process, at least when compared to something like lagers. That said, brewers are still encouraged to stick to kind of an accepted set of, quote, must-dos, which you didn't do in a recent batch of Belgian Tripel that you made.
Oh, man, this is definitely one of those styles where there's a high amount of, sanctimoniousness just because it's brewed in monasteries, but also the amount of sanctimony that people have for how you need to brew it and how traditionally to get there's a lot of really strong opinions around it. So to do something as unsanctimonious as do a short and shoddy, we'll see how it turns out, I guess. So I started out with a full 5-gallon or 19-liter batch. I think I started my day at around 8:03 a.m. Usually I'm the person that I'll heat the water up the night before and mill the grains the night before, and then just show up to heated water. I think in this case it was around 120 to 87 sulfite to chloride ratio. So I definitely did favor that sulfate in this particular beer.
Yeah, I love that. That's what I would do as well. And 120 to 87 are the exact numbers based on your water profile. To me, that is like exactly what I'm going for in a style like this. Pale, high alcohol, want it to be crushable. That works.
Oh, again, I want that dryness to be there in the finish. So this is one way you can kind of ensure that it finishes dry and not have to depend so much on some other things. So from here, we dive into the recipe. So the grain bill, maybe complicated for some, maybe more straightforward than others. Some decisions were made here, but I did 68% Tex malt Lando Pilsner malt, which is kind of a slightly under-modified Pilsner malt, so not too dissimilar from Dingman's in that regard. I did a 5% Tex malt Denton County wheat, which is, again, I have a whole bucket of that, so why not add a little wheat malt? Again, this kind of lightens it a little bit. Can add some mouthfeel, but really, to me, I'm just trying to lighten that body a smidge. I like to add aromatic malt to mine as well, just to get a little hint of a little something extra. And then the real fun here is I did 8% Pilsner dry malt extract and 70% table sugar. Who puts dry malt extract in their triples here, Marshall? Much less table sugar.
People who are brewing short and shoddy and are expecting to get a lower than normal efficiency, that's just a common thing. And so to supplement with a little bit of DME, which you know is going to contribute fermentable sugars, I don't see an issue with that. So you could have gone full table sugar and really lightened this. But I remember chatting with you, and you just wanted to ensure that there was still, at least some, Pilsner malt character to this beer. So all good there. Now, one note real quick, that the DME and the table sugar were added after the mash, but they are fermentable, so we included it in that section. Of course, you're not going to add DME to your mash.
No, and I really think so. This I brewed on my Brewzilla, and so in these smaller, like however many 8-gallon or so systems that are electric all-in ones, a really good strategy if you're making a big beer is you can do iterated mashing, which is the antithesis of short, or you can just add DME, which is the exact definition of short. It's the easy button instead of having to do a big long reiterated mash. But anyway, so when my water was at the strike temperature, I added my grains to it and incorporated them before, and checking to ensure that I was at my target temperature of around 145 degrees Fahrenheit or 63 degrees Celsius.
You are driving dryness here. That is the whole purpose behind such a low mash temp, I have to imagine.
Well, and the reality is you will get pretty good conversion for beta amylase here. It's probably on the lower end for a lot of people, and so I really was kind of curious while we're doing this short and shoddy. Let's push that lower floor of this and see how low we can go.
Yeah, no, and that's a good call. I've actually done 144 once. It was accidental, but back when I was batch sparging and had a difficult time heating my mash up, went 144, which is about 62C, on a red IPA, and it worked just fine. So
there you go. And so I only mashed for about 30 minutes, which is a bit taboo for extracting all that sugar, but here we go. And then after the grains were removed, as I was kind of bringing it up to a boil, or right before I was bringing it up to a boil, I added the DME and the sugar and incorporated those. It's a good idea when you're adding DME and sugar, especially early on, to turn off your electric burner so you don't scorch the bottom. Just as an aside, I highly recommend that. And then after that, the wort was then boiled for 30 minutes. I had a 57-gram Hallertau Tradition addition at 30 minutes, and then a 15-gram Hallertau Mittelfrüh at 5 minutes.
30 minutes with an all pills or mostly pills malt wort. You are just crazy, Will. It's going to be
super.
A corn bomb.
Yep, that's how I like my triples, nice and corny, just like
just
everybody
like
else.
You, right?
Just like everybody else, real corny. Okay, So that is the common theory, is that DMS would be an issue. Also, are you going to get enough bitterness from those bittering hops only going for 30 minutes? But let's see how it turns out. So when the boil was done, I quickly chilled the wort down to 77F with a Jaded Brewing Hydra Immersion Chiller, and then transferred it to a sanitized kegmenter. And so at this point, I had a refractometer reading, and it showed, after I did the conversion, that it was at 1068 OG, giving me a whopping 53% brew house efficiency.
My experience with short and shoddy brewing is that with regular brewing even, is that the higher the OG, the less conversion I tend to get. So when you're cutting out another half hour to hour of your mash rest, it's only going to go a little bit lower. To me, not a big deal if my goal is to save time. So 53%, yeah, it's pretty low, but it's not horrible.
Right. We got to the specs because we kind of did enough planning on the front end of the recipe to make sure that we were going to be where we wanted to be at the beginning. So it's not a big deal. it worked out fine. After this, I pitched a single pouch of Imperial Yeast B48 Triple Double, and then that was at around 10:31 a.m., meaning that, if we discount the little bit of time I spent the night before, the half hour or so getting water and malt ready, that was about a 2 hours and 28 minutes, about a 2.5 hour brew day on a 120 volt Brewzilla system.
I think it's important to note that when I started the short and shoddy deal, I was brewing on propane, and that is real fast. I then converted to a 240 volt system, which is also very fast. These 120 volt systems, the biggest complaints I hear about them are that, it just takes so long to heat water up to get it to a boil. You brewed a batch of triple 1068 triple in less than 2.5 hours on a 120 volt system. I think that's phenomenal.
So what helps too is planning your brew days out accordingly. Again, the main reason I mill my grain and treat my water ahead of time is because then there's a time that I'm asleep, or time that I'm at work, or time where I'm doing something else that my water is actually heating to the appropriate temperature, and then it just holds it at my my mash in temp, and it's not a huge deal to, you're not waiting for it to rise up. Whereas if I was to just turn it on and wait, it'd take about an extra 45 minutes for my water to get where I want it to be. So
right.
There is that. Okay, so the fermenter, I placed it in my very big chair in a room that's a very lovely, fermentation chamber there, but it's literally next to my office where I work. So I put it in a chair in that corner, and left it to ferment at about 77F, which is about what my AC runs here in the summer. So lots of fun there. With no signs of fermentation visible 7 days later, I took a hydrometer measurement, and the beer got all the way down to 1004 FG.
Ooh. Well, that supports your use of a lower, the 145 degree Fahrenheit mash temp. My goodness, 1004 is crazy low.
A lot of sugar in there too, and that gets us to about 8.4% ABV, which is pretty awesome. That's kind of right where I want to be. That's a good sweet spot.
That'll get you going, all right.
So I decided to naturally carbonate this beer via keg conditioning, and I used table sugar, which should impart an appley note, right? Because you're just using sucrose. And so I had a sanitized keg, and I know this kind of comes up, but basically I had it full of Star San. I pushed the CO2 out. I gently added the priming sugar solution into the keg, and then kind of purged it a few times through the PRV valve. And then I close transferred the beer into the keg after that. And then I left it alone for around 9 weeks, kind of forgot about it. And then oh crud, I got an article I got to write. Let's go get some tasters.
Such motivation.
Highly motivated, philosophy, contributor of the year in the running right here. So I guess let's talk about some of the objective observations. I will say, because we only let it go for 9 weeks, it was golden, but it did have a little bit of a haze. It still had a lovely foam cap on it and nice head retention. Other than kind of the hazy color, I think it looks good.
Yeah, I'm looking at the picture right now. It definitely has more of a golden color than it does a pale yellow color. And I think that's that aromatic malt just working a little bit. Also, whenever I use DME, I tend to get a little bit darker than expected. So maybe that contributed a touch more orange color to it. But it's gorgeous. It does have a slight haze. Who knows what would have happened if you'd let it sit there for another 6 months. My guess is it probably would have dropped bright.
Right. And it was... it's one of those things where I did let it sit because we had it around for a little bit, and it did drop clear after another month or so. And we'll talk about some impressions there. So when I sampled the beer right after kegging, I got this peppery, black pepper, pink pepper kind of flavor to it. And, it was really, really prominent in the beginning, and then it kind of faded away after a week or so in the kegerator. And I say that it turned out well in the short term, and I served it to some people that are kind of Belgian beer fans, a buddy here local, Tim, and then another guy, Brian, who are both really big into Belgians, and they approved of it early on. But I have to say that as it aged and as it went on, it just got better and better and better. But obviously we got tasters only a few weeks into that cooling off period, so.
That's part of the short and shoddy thing, is you're going to taste this beer done in a way, in multiple ways that aren't traditional. And for Belgian Tripel, that means you're serving it relatively more fresh than you would maybe, if you weren't doing short and shoddy. So you served this beer to 25 tasters, all of whom were informed of the style and asked to evaluate the beer based on both previous experiences they may have had with Tripel, as well as the BJCP style description, which we provide in the survey.
Yeah, so the average characteristic rating in terms of how hoppy, malty, and dry the beers were, the tasters rated the strongest characteristic as being maltiness, which yielded an average of 3 out of 5 tasters. And then tasters rated the dryness as a 2.4 out of 5, and hoppiness was the lowest of 2 out of 5, which seems pretty in line with what we're going for in a Belgian triple, honestly.
Yeah, this kind of makes sense to me. I would have expected the dryness to be more highly rated than the maltiness. That's just my kind of conception of a triple. But the fact that those were, 0.6 out of 5 off, basically, that's not a huge deal. I do think your use of aromatic and DME, again, may have contributed to a bit more malt character. Not that it pulled it out of style by any means, but the hoppiness being as low as it was, that doesn't surprise me at all. Breaking those separate characteristics down in terms of hops, the most prominent hop characteristic noted by tasters, 9 out of 25 tasters went with fruity. 8 people felt it was spicy. 4 felt floral. 2 rated dank caddy, which doesn't make any sense to me. And 1 each said earthy and berry. Nobody endorsed pine, resinous, melon, or onion garlic. The dank caddy thing is weird to me, and I always wonder, people who are unfamiliar or less familiar with certain styles, I wonder if sometimes they struggle to come up with the terminology to use to describe what it is that they're perceiving.
Right, and I don't know how people perceived that peppery note, because again, it was pretty prominent early on and eventually faded out. But there were some interesting things happening that were kind of more yeast character that might have gotten lumped into hop character, just based on how they filled out the survey.
The fact even the hop character, though, was rated as fruity and spicy speaks volumes to me, because chances are that wasn't the hop character. My hunch is that was more likely the yeast character. So interesting findings nonetheless. In terms of malt character, 10 out of 25 tasters thought it was caramel sweet. 6 rated it, thought it was toasty. 4 thought it was cracker bread crust. 3 rated it as being or endorsed roast, which doesn't make sense to me. And 1 each said nutty and chocolate. I don't know if people are fat fingering this survey, but roast and nutty and chocolate, does that jibe at all with how you perceive this beer?
Nope. Those are very surprising that anyone put roast or nutty and chocolate. There was no roasted malt in here, but again, maybe something with the peppery thing you convert to roast. Maybe you're just trying to find a category in your head that makes those things fit, and maybe they didn't understand quite what a phenolic was. Hard to say.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So most excitingly, though, the yeast character, 17 out of 25 people, and this goes along with how you described it, Will, endorsed phenolics as being the most prominent yeast character in this beer. 3 people rated clean. 2 people said esters and sulfur each, and then 1 person put wild. So phenolics, by and large, a majority of people felt that was the most prominent fermentation character, which, again, peppery, spicy, maybe there was a little bit of clove in there. That makes sense.
Yeah, I would say phenolic is definitely kind of the more of what I associate with it. Maybe a little bit of esters, but definitely if you're going for the most prominent thing, phenolics. I don't know where the clean came from. I don't think this was a very clean tasting beer from the early on all the way to when I had it 6 months later, still hanging out in my kegerator. And wild, I don't understand either. But hey, it's a survey. People put anything.
Yeah, that's right. And a side note on this, what I find so interesting about, vast majority of people rating phenolics as being the most prominent yeast character is that you fermented it warm. So it kind of flies in the face of this hypothesis that cooler temperatures encourage the production of phenols. You got a really spicy, peppery note fermenting it at 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So, it's something to keep in mind if you're trying to plan out one of these beers, at least when you're fermenting with B48 triple double. In terms of off flavors, only 3 people felt they perceived off flavors. There was no consistency between these 3 people. 1 person said they got DMS. Another person felt they detected acetaldehyde, and a third person noted both alcoholic and yeasty notes. I just think that's a function of people being overly evaluative. That's my personal opinion. What do you think, Will?
Well, I mean, you kind of look at the 2 people that got, 1 person got the wild character, maybe they thought they got like a DMS or an acetaldehyde. I don't know. So it's kind of interesting. Also, it's something to note in our survey that like if you hit that you tasted an off flavor, it opens up a whole list of options. And so who knows what they were picking at that point? Maybe they weren't familiar with everything. It's hard to say. Like they're beer people, but they're not all professional BJCP certified judges. So
absolutely, yeah. And honestly, I've drank beers next to, I'm a certified BJCP judge. I've been drinking beer a long time. I feel like I have a decent awareness, at least, of off flavors. And I've been drinking the same exact beer next to somebody who has a similar level of experience as me. And he might, perceive an off flavor that I don't pick up. Sometimes it just happens that way. We think we're perceiving something, or maybe we have a lower sensitivity to something. So who knows if it was really there, but you didn't perceive it. And the majority of people didn't perceive off flavors. So on that respect, you're doing well. One of the questions that we ask at the end of the survey is, how well does this beer represent the style based on your past experience, as well as the BJCP description that we provide? 2 out of the 25 people rated it a 5 out of 5. They thought it was a perfect spot-on example of a Trappist triple. 15 people, this is the majority here, rated it a 4 out of 5. 7 people rated it a 3 out of 5. Nobody gave it a 2 out of 5. And just one person gave it a 1 out of 5. Again, nobody gave it a 0 out of 5. So by and large, this beer was viewed by most drinkers as being a fairly good, if not perfect, example of a Belgian triple. So, hey, good job. It speaks, again, volumes about the short and shoddy approach not necessarily being as disastrous as some might believe.
Yeah, I think a 3 or a 4 out of 5 is fair. I'm not sure I'd rate it, maybe 5 out of 5, probably not, though. I think it's hard to make myself give it a 5 out of 5, the halo effect and all.
Yeah.
So I think a 3 or a 4 out of 5 is reasonable here. It was, to me, a fairly decent representation of the style. Early on, to me, after it aged out another few months, it was probably maybe I would have been more solidly in the 4 or 5 out of 5 after a little bit of age. But not everybody had the luxury of having it around for as long as I did. So. Right.
The final question that we ask, though, is despite its representativeness of style, how much did you like this beer? Did you think it was subjectively? Did you think it was good? Did you enjoy drinking it? 5 out of the 25 people said 5 out of 5. So 3 people who didn't think it was a 5 out of 5 in terms of how well it represented the style still thought it was delicious enough to give it a 5 out of 5 in terms of their preference. Another 7 rated it a 4 out of 5. 8 people rated it a 3 out of 5. 4 people gave it a 2 out of 5, and I'm assuming it's that same person who gave it a 1 out of 5 on the how well it represents the style. That one person likely also gave it a 1 out of 5 in terms of their preference, so they could just not be a big fan of the Belgian yeast character. Who knows? Nobody gave it a 0 out of 5. Again, this all lines up. This looks like you made a good example of a triple that people tended to enjoy and felt like it was a good representation of the style with only 3 people. You serve somebody Pliny the Elder, 25 people Pliny the Elder, and ask them about off flavors. I guarantee at least 3 people are going to note an off flavor. It just happens that way.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm pretty happy here because, the vast majority rated it 3 out of 5 or better, right? Like 20 out of 25 people rated it at 3 out of 5 or better for preference. Also pretty, again, along with the BJCP styles, obviously I would call this beer, at least on a homebrew level, success. Maybe if you put it into a competition against some other examples or compared it to some examples locally from your Total Wine or whatever, maybe it doesn't stack up at the 5 out of 5 category like world class, but I think we made a pretty solid example. And I know I keep overemphasizing this again, as it sat around for a little while longer, it just got better and better and better, man. So, obviously not everybody had the luxury of time on their side, but me and my wife got to enjoy a really great, maybe what I would rate 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5 beer towards the end of that keg.
Yeah, that's awesome. And honestly, other side of the coin, maybe it would stack up to these other, world-class examples. We don't know. We didn't compare it in that way. But again, to reemphasize over and over, preference is subjective. If you go in and you make a beer like this and you only spent 2.5 hours making it versus 6 hours, in my opinion, you win. So if it turns out good and you like it at least. So we do have a couple reader comments. The first one comes from, I'm going to butcher this, Yorn K, who says, going from 1068 to 1004 would be an attenuation of close to 94%, which is well beyond the specs of your yeast. What do you think explains that high attenuation? Is the table sugar, if you exclude table sugar impact on OG, you still end up with an OG of 1048, and with 1004 FG, that would still be 91% attenuation. So is it the table sugar, or am I missing something?
I've had several packages of yeast from Imperial and other places that did go above and beyond like the expected attenuation. So what does that explain that? Well, we went really warm and we pushed it really warm the entire time. That could help out. Table sugar is 100% fermentable basically in your calculators, especially table sugar. So that obviously helped contribute to it. So, there's some things here, but I think the yeast was like really active. In fact, if I recall, keeping this at 77 made a pretty good mess. If you look at the pictures of my fermenter on this, I had a I had it inside of like a 1 gallon pitcher, and that was on purpose because I knew at some point it was going to puke out Krausen from the blow off tube at some point in time. So, so it was a pretty active, pretty vigorous fermenter. So I'm not totally surprised it pushed beyond expected attenuation, but again, that's just been an experience with a lot of yeast brands lately where you're going beyond what I would typically expect.
So you've got healthy yeast, you've got a lot of sugar, you've got DME, which is highly fermentable, and you mashed at 145 degrees Fahrenheit. It does not surprise me that you hit that 94% attenuation. That all kind of adds up to me, but who knows? Your mileage may vary, Jorn, if I'm saying your name properly, and it may be that you get different attenuation. Also, water chemistry. I've found different water chemistries can affect fermentation as well. So, final comment comes from Steve Cushman, who dropped this one on our Facebook post. He said, "So did saving a whole hour on brew day really make it worthwhile? At 53% efficiency, it seems like a wasteful effort. The Belgian brewers of yesterday that would make multiple beers from progressive weaker runnings would probably not be too impressed that so much potential got left behind in the mash tun. Why this fascination with short and shoddy? Will, it was your intention to impress the Belgian brewers of yesterday?"
Well, I can't say that I even thought about them at all, other than maybe in a few aspects of recipe design, and thank them for contributing such a great style. Honestly, I think people don't take into account that time is money, and time is a commodity in and of itself, and so you can't just look at I spent $5 more on malt and hops. You have to look at I saved hours of my life that I can now go spend with my family or go spend doing something else that I find joy in as well. And so I know that, there are some people that they go out and they do the brew days and they take like 8-9 hours in a day and they get a lot of great satisfaction out of it. And I used to be one of those people too, but then I had kids and that became not so much in the cards. And so would I do everything the same on this again? Probably not. I'd probably slow down a few things just because short and shoddy is a really rushed process. And there's a lot of cleanup at keeping your fermentation at 77F the whole time. But, so I might change a few things, but, I would have no problem brewing this recipe again this way. Again, blaspheming all of the Belgian monks that brewed it before me. Sorry, guys. But I think time is definitely a commodity. And I think, people of God would very much approve me taking that extra time and spending it with my family.
There you go. That's a good way to spin it. I actually appreciate comments like Steve's. We don't get them infrequently. But to me, what it really points out is just that, in homebrewing, as in any hobby, there are going to be people who have different focuses, different interests, and that's okay. Who cares if somebody wants to do it, get 53% efficiency and cut 3 hours out of their brew day, or somebody like you said who wants to spend 9 hours sitting out in the garage smoking a cigar. I have friends who do that. It's whatever floats your boat. And it's not that we're obsessed or fascinated necessarily, though I would contend I'm fascinated with the short and shoddy thing. It's not that we're trying to push that on anybody. It's that we're just trying to test the limits in a way because that's fun. I grew up watching Discovery Channel. I still get something out of exploring things that even don't matter that much. And that's really, for me at least, the impetus behind continuing to run through the whole BJCP guidelines and brew all of these styles using short and shoddy. Let's see what can happen. Doesn't mean that we're encouraging anybody to do it, nothing like that. But I do, we get a lot of feedback from people saying, man, I would never have considered trying, cutting 30 minutes off my mash, 30 minutes off my boil. And that hour has allowed me to brew, 2-3 more times per month. I love that. So maybe that's the driving piece behind my fascination with short and shoddy. But regardless, if people are benefiting from it, then I'm happy that we've been doing it. So, well, I think that about covers Belgian Tripel. Will, is there anything else you have before we wrap this one up?
Again, this is a great style. It's very much one of those styles that if you have friends that have not found the beer that they like yet, this is one of those really good introductory styles along with some other Trappist styles to just show people, hey, beer can taste like something other than just the fizzy yellow lager, which most of us enjoy, but not everybody does.
Yeah, amen, man. I mean, I feel like Belgian ales are one of those unique ones that you're going to give it to some people and they're going to be completely put off by the how characterful it is. But others, it may be that nudge that they needed to get into beer even, I think that's why it was so popular among homebrewers when I was getting into homebrewing, is because it was so different than what we had available to us. So if you've not tried brewing a triple, this may be your opportunity. You don't have to put 9 hours into your brew day, and it may turn out to be just as good as something you buy off the shelf. So Don't forget to subscribe to the Brew Lab podcast, where host Kate Jobe takes you into the lab with brewing experts so you're notified when new episodes drop. And you can click the link in the description of this episode to get all of the nitty-gritty details about this short and shoddy Belgian Tripel. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more. Life is good, the likelihood of me.
Before Shopify, were you wondering, where are my sales at? Now you're selling with Shopify, the global commerce platform supercharging your selling. You have no problem selling online, in person, on social media, and beyond. Gary, easy on the cha-ching.
Oh, sorry, but my Shopify sales are through the roof.
Start selling with Shopify today and discover how millions of businesses around the world use Shopify to ignite their selling. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/listen. Shopify.com/listen.